Hi, folks. Robert Quigley here, America's Independent, Washington, D.C. We're on the road to the White House. Join Quigley's Shadow Government, the Independence talk show, as we dissect the issues along the way to the White House. Look for us on your favorite podcast, radio, and TV stations. RobertQuigleyForPresident.com. We're going to start today's episode with a quote of the day. And stick with me throughout the 30-minute broadcast, and it will make perfect sense by the time we get to the end. A nation's culture resides in the hearts and in the soul of its people. We're going to start today with the voter questions. Joe Beatty from someplace sunny USA. He says, Quigley, can you please talk about QuigleyCare, medical education, and how we're going to reform the primary health care system across the United States? Yes, Joe, let's jump right in. QuigleyCare, we're basically going to divide the current healthcare system into two different parts. Part A is what we call the primary healthcare system. That's the initial checkup, the initial testing, diagnosis. The doctors and the medical profession figures out what's wrong with you. 9 times out of 10 it's prescription. You'll be okay in 2 weeks, and all is good. That's going to be free for everybody. No deductibles, no copay. Absolutely walk in free, give them your ID card or some form of identification, and you've got your primary health care checkup. Now, everything else that we currently have, private health insurance, employer-sponsored health insurance, government health insurance, Medicare, Medicaid, etc., that all will be grouped into the secondary health care system, and it will carry on like it currently does without much bother. Now, what we're doing here is we are introducing a very strong component of preventive health care. And the reason why most folks are afraid to go to the doctor, of course, to find out what's wrong with them, is, of course, the copay, the cost, or they don't have any medical insurance. And we all know that if disease is caught early, like, say, cancer at the very beginning, a couple $1,000s, versus stage 4 cancer, a couple of $1 million, and maybe you got 6 months or a year to live. If we catch any of these diseases early, the outcomes are much healthier, folks have a longer life expectancy, and the cost of treatment is lower. So what we are doing is we are lowering the cost of health care across the entire society. Now, the next part of QuigleyCare is medical education. We're the only country on the planet that requires doctors to go from high school to undergraduate school to medical school. The reason why this exists is because the American system has been allowing professional groups and trade groups, etc., to carve out niches of the economy for themselves. And the AMA was one of the first ones to do this. We got to bring it to an end. Every other country on the planet educates their doctors. They go from high school graduation to medical school, and they are treating patients by the time they're like 25 years old, more or less. And in America, we have a shortage of doctors. We have medical deserts. We have small towns and communities all across America where the good folks have to drive 50, 100 miles to get to the nearest health facility. We have small town hospitals closing down left, right, and center, and they have been closing down for decades. So what we have, folks, is a profit-oriented system, and we have to blunt that to a degree to make sure that the good citizens across this country are well taken care of. So we are going to increase by 2, 3, or 4 times the number of primary health care professionals in the country. But make no mistake about it, all doctors very soon are going to go from high school education to medical school to any kind of specialist education to practice if they so choose. And this is going to greatly benefit all concerned. So essentially, the primary health care doctor is going to be like the evidence gatherer. They're going to be taking, fluid samples, perhaps skin samples. They're going to check your pulse. You're going to stick out your tongue and do the ah thing. And that kind of evidence gathering is one skill set. There may be x-rays involved. But then as we move up the line, we have other professionals that also analyze this data, and collectively we can get to the accurate conclusion and diagnosis of that patient, and they can be taken care of in a proper, cost-effective way. So that's going to be QuigleyCare in a nutshell. Now, the next questioner is actually a statement. It's from Phil Kennedy. He resides over in Arizona, and Phil says, My name is Phil Kennedy, and I am writing from Phoenix, Arizona, where I first became aware of your campaign through your radio advertising. As someone who in 1996, at the age of 15, wrote a high school newspaper article about Ross Perot that said he is the best choice for the presidency, regardless of his platform, because the stranglehold that the two parties, Democrats and Republicans, have on American politics will kill this country. And it's only going to get worse as time goes by, he said, back when he was 15 years old, 27 years ago. And of course, he writes, it has gotten worse. Exactly what he predicted panned out. And as a side note, George Washington predicted this outcome 250 years ago too, but we'll come back to him. Phil says, I've read through your platform and must say that I agree with not everything, but a majority of what you have planned. And really, it appears that you have a solid platform based in common sense solutions that recognizes science while also staying true to your faith. All those points are true. Phil goes on to say, I especially like your ideas for the Supreme Court, and I've also been a lifelong fan of the good parts of Andrew Jackson's presidency. As someone who is 42 years old, I believe that I have not seen the best president yet, and I'm interested in doing what I can here in Phoenix to spread the word about your candidacy. Well, Phil, I definitely appreciate all of those good words and sentiments. Thank you very much. I, too, am a fan of Andrew Jackson. Andrew Jackson, when his word is heard today, people think Trail of Tears and they think slavery. But the reality of it, he was on the forefront of the problems that we are facing today. He recognized back in the early 1800s that there was an inherent conflict between the Supreme Court and all courts versus the legislative and executive branches of government. And he realized that in a give and take situation, it was not going to be the courts that ruled the day. It was going to have to be the executive part of the government. So what happened? Well, the Supreme Court ordered Andrew Jackson not to move the Indians from the Tennessee, southeastern part of the United States, Florida, over to Oklahoma. And he said, in essence, he said to the Supreme Court, he said, look, you have made your order, you've used your pen, you've used your paper, now go and enforce that order. And of course, he moved the Indians, and we have the infamous Trail of Tears. But in his day and time, the whole population lived off of agriculture. So the only way this country was going to survive was it needed more agricultural land, and that's exactly what Andrew Jackson was doing. If he had not had done that, we would not have the America that exists today. People can debate the positive and negative of that statement, but that's the reality of what it was. So when you take his recognition of this inherent conflict between courts and the executive branch, what he was saying was, the courts are always looking back. The legislator is trying to solve problems coming up into the future based upon past evidence. But the executive must enforce the law and must keep an eye on the horizon to see what problems are coming over the horizon and to deal with them as they happen. So there's the inherent conflict. Now, an example of what I'm talking about in today's world, when we get to the White House, one of the very first things we're going to do is we're going to close the southern border tighter than a drum. And of course, this being America, like the very next hour, folks are going to file cases in the court system, trying to undo me closing the border. Well, but the reality is, when you read the Constitution in a straightforward, literal sense, it very clearly says the President of the United States must keep the integrity of this country together in one piece. And we all know that in matters of foreign affairs, the President has wide discretion. But as the strongest inherent power of a presidency, the President must maintain the integrity, geographically, of course, of the United States of America. So when I do close that border, and no doubt those courts will get involved, any court order that goes against those actions will be ignored. And I will say that again, if it's absolutely unclear, I would ignore those court orders in the same vein that Andrew recognized that he had to do what was necessary for the preservation and perpetuation of the country in his day. I would do the same thing. And I would go one step further, and I would lean to the side that any court judge folks in America who thought it was not proper to maintain a strong border integrity. That's borderline treason. That is not acceptable behavior. And if you review all of my other episodes, all my other videos, there are many other issues that come into play here. But just on this point, we're talking about Andrew Jackson and his approach to solving these really difficult problems, the cutting edge problems, as it were, and how Quigley would deal with the same type of similar situation today. All right, so let's move on. The third question is from Jeffrey Ballots. And essentially, Jeffrey is a CO2 climate impact denier. He claims everything I say about CO2 removal and climate impacts and global warming is my globalist agenda. And he basically wants me to prove it. Well, the reality is, Jeffrey, he didn't say where he was from in America, by the way, so somewhere in sunny America. But the reality, Jeffrey, is I am not a big fan of the globalist agenda. Yep, I live the globalist agenda. I have a fantastic international background, second to none in the country. There's no way that has my background in the country. So I know an awful lot about it. But if you look at the bits and pieces of all of my programs and proposals, then the only conclusion that you can come to is that Quigley thinks it's much better to roll back international trade and the globalist agenda. In other words, we've got to take care of all Americans first and foremost. And then once we've taken care of ourselves, we might then have some time and resources left over to take care of others. So the last part of that, in terms of the globalist agenda, just doesn't hold water. CO2, there's a ton of evidence out there, but basically you look at things like ice core data, you look at DNA data, believe it or not. We look at forest and vegetation data, tree ring data. We look at temperature records. We have both military and climatic sensors operating around the planet and have been for the last 100 and some odd years. We have meteorological sensors all over the place. We have recorded a huge amount of data. So we know how to read the data that we recorded. And of course, we understand that CO2 concentrations go up, the planet heats up, and that creates a whole chain reaction of events that makes it very difficult for humans to live. So the medical biological fact to keep in mind in this conversation is very simple. If the temperature is 90 degrees outside or inside and humidity is 100%, your body cannot maintain its regular temperature on its own. If the temperature outside is 120 degrees and the humidity is 10%, then the human body cannot regulate its own temperature. So in other words, we are living in a very narrow, fine-tuned zone of temperature tolerance for the perpetuation of the human species and mammals generally. So if we lose that, we're talking about extinction. So the issue of proof is absolutely there. There's no question about it. Anyone who says there's no proof is not reading the science, or they don't understand the science. And the consequences of not acting, as I've just described, is also very clearly there. If you don't believe me, call up your local doctor and pretend like you need that, primary care checkup. And when you get there, ask the doctor about temperature tolerances and the body's ability to control that temperature, and you'll see what I'm talking about. So that's Jeffrey's question. We appreciate it. It's a very good question. We get these types of questions all the time. Okay, moving on, let's start drilling down into the themes of today. A gentleman by the name of Chuck Todd, he wrote an NBC article this week, and essentially it was titled, "Voters Deliver a Primal Scream Demanding Change." Okay, he's got an eye on part of the landscape ball that we have our eye on. So let me just run through a couple of the talking points of this article in a broader sense, and specifically what he was talking about. So what we know, young voters are more independent. We know every house has a gun. We know that folks don't trust the government to help them anymore. We know that 75% of the population wants to end the status quo. We also know, interestingly, on sort of a side note fact here, we also have learned that in the campaign world, apparently, if you do less campaign events, you have higher poll numbers. So, and of course, the opposite seems to be true as well. You do more campaign events outside, you have fewer poll numbers. There are a couple of different ways to read that, but the joke that comes to my mind is, my great grandmother once told me, she said, "Son, sometimes it's better to shut up so people don't know you're stupid, and than to talk a lot and confirm to everybody that you really are stupid." So maybe it's something along those lines, but anyways, that was an interesting observation from this article. Okay, we more media coverage is needed. So if you're going to campaign for a political office, you actually can't do anything. If you cut back on your campaign events, you have to compensate by ramping up your media events. So what the voters are basically seeing across America is they are seeing the listing ship. Democrats and Republicans are not listening to voters, okay? Government is, in fact, fading and falling apart. So what we've got is we've got the perfect stage for independents to take the White House, to come to power in the House of Representatives and the Senate. And another way to think about it is, the voter willingness to try new things is also at an all-time high. It's kind of like going back to that cancer patient we were talking about a minute ago. When you go to the doctor and he tells you you've got 6 months to live, well, guess what? You will try every single experimental drug on the cabinet. And that's basically where the American electorate is. And the Democrats and the Republicans have had their day, and they've made a mess of things royally. So we have to jump in and do everything we can to put the American ship back in order. Okay, moving on, we're also seeing fragmented elections and fragmented government. Gavin and DeSantis, two unpopular candidates, have been running a side circus show in the campaign world. Both lack international experience or training to do the president's job. The Republican primaries can simply be described as a group of deluded unelectables versus Trump. And the far left, they're holding the Democratic Party hostage, trying to get too old, senile Biden back in office so a bunch of far left, unseen faces can continue to control the federal government. There's so many problems in what I'm saying here, folks. It would actually take an entire day to sort them all out. But essentially, the Democratic Party, they are not supporting democracy. You think I'm joking about this? Well, let me give you a perfect example. Let's take Dean Phillips and Robert Kennedy and the Michigan governor. These are three Democrats that definitely want to challenge Joe Biden for the presidency. 75% of the people in the country, 75% of Democrats do not want Joe Biden to run. So what this far left crew are doing after they've captured the Democratic Party, of course, is they are essentially making elementary playground school rules. They're trying to manipulate the system to prevent others from playing. Okay, it's like I've got the ball, and since I got the ball, I get to make the rules, and we don't want anybody else to play, and that's just the way it is. So these Democratic Party rules do not have the force of law. They are seriously manipulating the system, and they are for anything but democracy. And now you will know from previous episodes that I contrast them with the far right, who want a democratic dictatorship, and the far left. They're pretty much in the same camp because democracy is just too much inconvenience and too much of a hindrance for these two extreme groups to deal with. So they're doing everything they can to overturn democracy all across America, starting with the Democratic primary that I'm just talking about. So onward we go, folks. The only thing that is holding America together at this point in time is our inertia. Think about that. It doesn't need a lot of explanation, but when you're having coffee later, dwell down into the details and you'll see what I'm talking about. Onward we go. Both the Democrats and the Republicans, as well as countless institutions across the society, they are engaged in intentional misrepresentation of laws. We can refer to this as the tyranny of the law, the scam of the law, legal criminals. I mean, rules in this society, we have put too much faith in a rule-based system. Don't get me wrong, we need rules for orderly conduct, but it has gone so far to the extreme that every group, Nick, nanny, local government, state government, federal government, everywhere we go, we have this constant perpetuation of pointless, useless rules, all trying to manipulate the system, which essentially means to protect somebody who's in power and to keep others, away from resources. It's just pure and simple playground stuff when you look at it from a bird's eye point of view. Now, folks, let me jump in and talk about my favorite topic of the day, and that's mail-in ballots, okay? Independents all across America are 100% in support of mail-in ballots. Quigley, I support these 100%. Register early, get your ballot early, vote as soon as possible, avoid the lines, avoid the bad weather, avoid the crowds. Complete that ballot in the comfort of your own home. New Hampshire is running a write-in campaign with Biden at this time period in the Democratic primary, because Biden and his far-left team have decided to skip New Hampshire. They want to go down to South Carolina because they think it's more representative of the whole country, so they don't really care. But the voters of New Hampshire have decided to conduct a write-in campaign. Now, Quigley is a write-in presidential candidate. Now, that means that when you get your ballot, you're going to have to write my name, Robert Quigley, in the blank spot for the presidency. I have confidence that everybody in America can do this. And even if you don't spell my name right, but you will, of course, if you are if you get a mail-in ballot, it doesn't matter because the election office must look for voter intent. So as long as you get my name close, like Robert Q or Quigley or however you want to refer to me, that would clearly identify that you're voting for Robert Quigley. This is the way of the future. This is what prevents any actual shenanigans or loss or theft of votes. I mean, definitely 100%, no doubt about it. We encourage all voters all across America to adopt the mail-in ballot process. Let's eliminate the far left and the far right's ability to manipulate the election, and let's not have any more Donald Trump issues with lies about stolen elections. Let's bring integrity back to our elections, and the mail-in ballot is the way to do it. Write my name, Robert Quigley, and we're all good. So when you get a chance, go to my website, robertquigleyforpresident.com. Donate what you can. Every dollar, both big and small, will help the campaign. And together, we're all going to do everything we possibly can to implement as many of the reforms that we possibly can that we talk about on our website. And we are going to make America work for all of us. My friends, until we meet again, I hope everybody has a fantastic afternoon, and all the best to you and your family.